Total War I, or World War I, if you'd rather, or the Great War as it was called at the time, because it was the greatest war in the history of the world till that day. But in a way a misnomer, because it was really a European war. It spilled over into the Pacific Ocean and the Far East a bit, and also the Middle East a bit. But it was pretty much well, on the other hand, the whole Atlantic Ocean was a battleground, and the Mediterranean, but that's flanking Europe. So it's primarily a European war. It lasted from 1914 to 18. It was a war of machine weapons, and we might as well get that term into your vocabulary, because now automation and the Industrial Revolution has created all these weapons I mentioned to you. I'll mention them one more time, because machine guns, this is where they come into their own, you might say, for the first time. Tanks, that is armored vehicles that can withstand punishment from artillery, airplanes, super battleships, submarines, and you would think that these machine weapons would, of course, transform warfare. Well. They did and they didn't. There was a man who wrote a 6-volume work in 1899. Don't learn his name, although he deserves to be remembered. His name was Ivan Bloch. He was a Polish-Russian banker. He wrote a series of volumes about war in the modern age. And he said one thing that was so prophetic. No one read it, of course. Only one of the volumes was even translated into English. I mean, who reads Polish? No offense, but you know, on the other hand. And he said that these weapons, when used by both sides, will cancel each other out. Or put another way, every weapon in the modern world has a counter-weapon. And so the result, he predicted, correctly as it turned out, would be stalemate. Neither side would have enough firepower or any kind of strategy that could be used to change things. And so what happened was, when the war broke out in the summer, the Guns of August 1914, it's been called, when it broke out in the summer of 1914, really July and August is when the armies got moving, you had the French army massed along the German frontier and vice versa. The Germans came through Belgium, which was supposed to be neutral in all this. Well, it was. The Germans violated international law, violated a neutral country, the Schlieffen Plan, to drive against Paris. The British crossed the Channel with their army, put it into France immediately, which they'd never done in the past. They always wait till the last part of the war, like fighting Napoleon. And the French army was also massed along German frontier, but not along the Belgian frontier. And so what you had was the so-called race to the sea. In basic military strategy, that means the Germans, by going through the Low Countries, well, through Belgium, not the Netherlands, they stayed neutral. They tried to outflank the French before the French could outflank them. That's what it's all about. And it's like trying to do an end run in football, of course, and what you do, you finally run to the sidelines, you're out of bounds. And that's what happened here. I've never said that before. That's a nice simile. You all understand football. Okay. The seacoast was out of bounds. So they raced to the sea. Neither side outflanked the other. They couldn't do anything on the ocean, of course. I mean, here they are. And so they sat there for 4 years. Nobody had any idea. No one had planned for a contingency what would happen if you couldn't outflank the enemy. And nobody had worked out a defensive strategy. Why? Because nobody could defeat a German. Jawohl. And the British, you know, the jolly old Brits and the frogs, the French, you know, well, you know, we're superior to everybody, our high culture. Arrogance, nationalism, now it comes home to roost. Romanticism, my country, my country, right or wrong, but my country, somebody once said in American history. Well, they figure they could lick the other side. Didn't work that way. Machines don't know that. And so you get a stalemate for 4 years on the Western Front. They dug in, they dug trenches. They sat there, killing each other for 4 years. And they would launch frontal assaults. Over the top was the message, with fixed bayonets, just charging into what came to be known as no man's land. The machine guns cut them down. Then the other side would do the same thing, bah, and they get cut down. Or bring up more reserves, and so on. And by the end of summer 1914, complete stalemate on the so-called Western Front. They tried to open up an Eastern Front with the Russians. The Russians made 15 offensives during the course of that war. And every one of them, they were clobbered by the German army in the east. Russians were terrible. So nothing happened on the Eastern Front either, really. We can't go into all this. But no one had anticipated what would happen. So what you get is millions of men perishing on the Western Front. Just a slaughterhouse. And no one could come up with a new idea. You can't have new ideas in the middle of a war. You got to think about it ahead of time. Nothing changes during a war. So, 4 years of stalemate, trench warfare. The same thing, in a different way, happened on the sea. The Germans had built a great battleship fleet to fight and defeat the British battleship fleet. And the British slightly outnumbered the Germans. They had one battle in the whole war, one big battle, Jutland, 1916, and no battleships were sunk. They all were armed. A few old ones and different types of ships were sunk, but no battleships, the dreadnoughts they call them, because they were so well armored, they could withstand the punishment, and they all had the same size guns, bam, 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 bam. So, and the Germans knew they couldn't beat the British fleet, which was superior in size, so the battleship, total waste. All these things, they never accomplished the darn thing in the whole war. And the submarines came out, and U-boats, underwater boats, Unterwasser, jawohl. German U-boats went out, submarines, started sinking shipping, so eventually the British came up with a convoy idea. They used it 100 years before, but didn't want to go back something that old, you know, really. Well, they finally did. And they also introduced, so they convoyed. Same thing as in the old days, convoys. The merchant ships, 100, 200 of them, escorted by battleships or destroyers or sub-chasers or whatever. And a new thing, flying boats. Flying boats operated out of airfields in the British Isles, and they could cover the North Sea pretty much, and also the approaches and the same and islands and so forth around. France had them too. And when a submarine saw an airplane up there with very crude radio, they knew the airplane could transmit a signal to British and French fleet units, go sink that submarine. So the flying boats only sank 1 or 2 subs, but they kept them down. When a submarine's down, it's very slow in those days, 6 knots, 10 miles an hour, very slow. So, stalemate, at land, at sea, and as it turned out, in the air. So, first big war in 100 years, but now it's industrialized. Nobody had planned for it. If they'd have studied the American Civil War, they would have known. But America, who studied America? We were a minor country. They would have learned something. So, it's total war. You just volume of fire. You just try to bludgeon the other guy into destruction till he just quits, or who runs out of men first in this destruction. And it's terrible.